In this video, we're going to go over how to compare homeowners insurance quotes. We'll start with the basics, which is your main coverage. So that's your dwelling, other structures, personal property, and your contents, additional living expense, which is money to live elsewhere if your house is uninhabitable from a claim, liability, medical payments, and deductibles. These are the ones that are going to be the easiest to pick out on your estimates and probably the easiest ones to get similar. Even if they're not identical, small differences aren't going to make a huge difference in your premium, but the closer you can get these together, the better. The harder part is really making sure that your endorsements, so the changes or the additional coverages on the policy, are the same. So these are kind of like the toppings, making sure that your toppings are the same when you're comparing policies. I'm not going to go through in order, but I'm going to go through in some of the most important ones. First one is replacement cost contents. Probably the most important one, and most quotes are going to include this. If they don't, there's an issue. Replacement cost contents is a big deal. This is the difference between getting all of your stuff brand new at Target after you had a house fire versus getting the cash value of it, which is basically what you could find it for on Craigslist. So that's a big deal. Make sure that's on your policy. Water backup, sump discharge overflow, sometimes called water backup, sewer and drains. This is an endorsement that gives you back coverage that's excluded on the standard policy for water that backs up into your house from off the resident's premises. Personal injury coverage, this is just broadened liability coverage. So your liability coverage on your homeowner's policy is pretty broad as it is. This endorsement just makes it that much better and plugs up some of the remaining holes in the coverage. Specific additional dwelling coverage or specified additional amounts of insurance. This is an additional coverage above the dwelling amount for if that dwelling amount of coverage is not enough to actually rebuild your house at the time of a loss. So if it takes more, in this case, more than $200,000 to do the rebuild because of inflation or demand surge because a bunch of houses were damaged, this gives you an additional bump of a certain percentage, in this case 25%, above that amount. Mold and fungus coverage. Most policies include mold and fungus coverage at a $10,000 amount, so $10,000 per occurrence. You can increase it to $25,000. Some companies don't include it at all, and this is a big deal. It's something that's important to know how it's covered and make sure that they're similar when you're comparing. Screen enclosure coverage or screen enclosure limitations. Some policies have a limitation for screen enclosure coverage. In this case, it's $10,000. Some policies exclude it altogether. Again, just important to know how it's covered if that's an issue on your particular property. Animal liability. It's not listed out on here specifically. It's actually listed on another page. In this case, animal liability is limited to $25,000, but it's included on the base policy form with Tower Hill Prime, this policy quote that I've got. Some companies will exclude it altogether unless you specifically add it on. And some companies' limitation, even if you have the limited animal liability coverage, will exclude certain breeds. So it's important to understand that coverage if it matters in your situation. And then ordinance or law coverage. This is an important one. This is additional coverage for upgrades that you need to make to the house at the time of a claim to comply with building codes, current building codes. So if you've got an older house, when they go to repair it or rebuild it, if they have to make changes or incur costs that are above what it would normally take to rebuild it the way it was because you have to build it to new codes, there's a amount of coverage for those upgrades. Usually it's stated as a percentage, 10, 25, or 50, and some policies start off with none. But this is intended for if you have to make improvements at the time of a claim due to comply with building codes or building law, you've got coverage for that. On this particular policy, again, it's at 25%. So just make sure that those numbers are similar across your various quotes. Some companies also have some endorsement packages, which are great. They kind of package a lot of these coverages together and bump up some of the basic limitations in the policy. Tower Hill has their Emerald package. American Integrity has their gold and silver and diamond packages. Olympus has their Spartan packages. There's a bunch of different names for these things, but if you get one of those packages, it makes it a little bit more complicated, but you'll want to pick through what's included on those that's important to you and make sure they're similar across your other estimates. And then there are some potential other limitations to look for. Some policy estimates show them, some don't, but things like jewelry coverage, firearms coverage, some companies have basic limits for them. Some companies have even just exclusions for those things unless you add them back. And some companies have some more unusual limitations for things like bicycles. Bicycles may be limited to $1,000. Tools may be limited to $5,000. Things like that may not be listed on your quote, but they're important to talk about with whoever you're buying the policy from to make sure that you're not limiting yourself somewhere that you need it. So the best way to compare is really to talk with an agent, and so they can help you kind of navigate the limitations and exclusions and the differences between the quotes. They can also help provide some insight on the differences between the various companies, from how they handle claims or differences in those special limitations I was talking about. And they can sometimes, if you have a good one, understand the differences in some of the actual policy wording, which is getting real deep, but differences for how companies cover various things or don't cover various things. Beyond the quotes and the endorsements, there are other differences. And again, that's why I prefer having an agent to talk to about those things and help you figure out what makes the most sense for you. But if you're going to do it by yourself, those are the things that you want to take a look at and make sure you get the same when you're doing a comparison. I hope this is helpful. If you're going to do it yourself, this is a great thing to list out and try to make sure they're the same. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call or reach out to us on the website. We'd love to help out any way we can.